All right, solutions to quiz 8, our last quiz for Math 243, spring 2020. What's going on here is, watching Tiger King. I'm running out of examples, as you can tell. Pretty happy to be done with these. Suppose I randomly select 120 Democrats and 150 Republicans. Those sound like a couple of sample sizes. So let's call N1 120 and N2 150. And make note of the fact that, all right, we're calling the Democrats the 1 and the Republicans the 2. And ask each whether they watch Tiger King. Found 60 of the Democrats, so X1 would be 60, and 90 of the Republicans, so X2 would be 90. Watch the show, determine if I can conclude with 95% certainty, so alpha's 5%. Sure, I'll write that. Feel like sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. That the portion of all Democrats who watch Tiger King is less than. Okay, so it's kind of nice that I listed the Democrat information first, and then the question was written relative to the Democrats. Again, I'm not trying to confuse you there. As long as you make your ones the Democrats and your twos the Republicans, then this less than is telling you that when you state your alternative hypothesis, you'll just put a less than sign in there. State the null and alternative? Sure. Both the null and the alternative hypotheses are going to compare together the population proportions of my two different groups. In this case, Democrats and Republicans. And my null hypothesis is going to be that those population proportions are the same. My alternative hypothesis, because I said proportion of Democrats is less than, and these are my Democrats over here, I'll put a less than sign in here. So this is going to end up being a left-tailed test. It's worth pointing out that if you wrote PR greater than PD, that would be totally fine too. I just think that that'd be a little bit less intuitive way to do it. Sketch the appropriate picture for the p-value method of hypothesis testing. Sure. So here is a pretty nice looking normal distribution. Throw 0 in the middle because it's hypothesis testing, and then go to stat tests and look for 2-prop z-test. When I go to 2-prop z-test, it'll ask me for the numbers that I wrote above. X1 is labeled up here to be 60. N1 is labeled to be 120. X2 is 90 here. And N2 is 150. And then it'll ask me what my claim is. Well, since my ones are my Democrats, my claim is that Democrats is lesser than Republican, so 1 is less than 2. And then you can either calculate or draw. I like to draw. So what it's going to do is it's going to shade over to the left here. It's going to give me a z-score. For my test statistics, z equals negative 1.6432. And then a p-value, barely over 5%. Wow, I made that really close. Fine. P-value equals 5.02%. Ever so slightly larger than alpha. State your conclusion. Include all 3 parts. Because my p-value is greater than alpha, just barely, but still. If your p-value is greater than alpha, there is not sufficient evidence to reject the null. And if you can't reject the null, you can't say that the claim is true. So I cannot conclude. That the proportion of all Democrats that watch this show is less than the proportion of all Republicans who watch this show. All right, and then moving on to part 2, probably won't surprise you that part 2 is dealing with confidence intervals as opposed to hypothesis testing. Using the same data as above, how convenient an 80% confidence interval for the difference in the proportions of all Democrats who watch the show and the proportion of all Republicans who watch the show. Sure, so first I want to sketch the appropriate picture, include all the normal stuff. So conveniently that'll come straight out of your calculator tests, and then instead of 2-prop z test, grab 2-prop z interval. And you'll put in the same numbers, and the calculator does you a solid by leaving those all in there for you. The confidence level that we want is 80% is what it specifies here. So I'll make that a 0.8, and then I'll calculate. Poet. And the numbers that I want to include are, well, that 80% confidence level. Sure. The point estimate and the bounds of the interval. So there's my 80%. The bounds of the interval go from negative 17.78 all the way up to negative 0.0222. And then my point estimate is the difference in the two p hats, so 0.5 minus 0.6, so negative 0.1. A lot of negative numbers here. Interpret your answer. Make sure you understand what negative numbers mean. Okay, because when I did this, put my Democrats in as the ones, these numbers are all relative to the Democrats. So what I'm saying is the Democrats watched that the difference in the proportion of all Democrats who watch this show and all Republicans who watch this show is between 17.78% less for the Democrats and 2.22% less for the Democrats. So one way I could write what I just said is I am 80% sure that the proportion of all Democrats who watch Tiger King is between 17.78 and 2.22% less than, because these are both negative, the proportion of all Republicans who watched Tiger King. You could write this differently. You could say I'm 80% sure that the proportion of all Republicans who watch this show is between 2.22 and 17.78% more than the proportion of all Democrats who watch Tiger King. You can do it either way. I think it makes the most sense to do it this way. So I'll leave my solutions this way to try to match up with as many of your answers as possible. But that's the idea for this quiz.